You're now on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome Facebook Live. Glad to have you with us. Make sure if you're watching our page, make sure you follow us, and you can also find us on YouTube as well. We've got a great show. We're going to be talking about the paranormal, of course, exorcisms, possessions, all that and more. Ike McFadden's my co-host joining me right now. Good to see you again, Ike.
Hey there, Todd. Yeah, this should be a very interesting show. It's, as you mentioned, on a subject that a lot of us think we know something about. Things like possession, exorcisms, but generally what most of us know comes from Hollywood, which, as we know, is somewhat questionable with the details.
That's right. You know, it reminds me of a show that's been on CBS recently called Evil. I don't know if you've seen that, Ike, but I've streamed it on Netflix, and I think they've got another season coming up. During that show, the show is based on a former priest. They bring in a psychiatrist. They also have a photographer they work with, and they work on behalf of the church to investigate whether a person is actually possessed, faking it, or experiencing a mental health issue. And tonight we're going to hear from an expert that's been there, documented it, and seen it all.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this. We have Dr. Richard Gallager. He is a board-certified psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry. He was educated at Princeton, Phi Beta Kappa, and trained in psychiatry and psychoanalysis at Yale and Columbia. So this guy knows what's going on. He developed the psychopharmacology curriculum for the New York Medical College and is currently on the Columbia University faculty. In the late 80s, he was approached by a Catholic priest to examine a woman who was possibly possessed. And even though he was initially skeptical, he soon learned that what he was saying wasn't easy to explain despite his years of training.
Now, in the early 1990s, Dr. Gallager became a member of the International Association of the Exorcists, even serving as a scientific advisor on its governing board. His book, Demonic Foes, My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist, Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks, and the Paranormal, documents his career of mixing science and spirituality while delving into the world of exorcism. Please welcome Dr. Richard Gallager. He is our guest tonight on The Road Beyond. Good evening to you, Dr. Gallager.
How you doing, fellas?
Good to see you on the show. I first want to ask you, let's talk about this first case that brought you into this in writing the book. Maybe you can tell us about that first case.
Well, you know, an early case that I highlight in the book was I use a pseudonym, Julia, and that was a incredibly flamboyant case. And that wasn't that far after the first case. Julia, the woman I use the pseudonym for, as with all these cases I'll talk about, although they were all real. That was a dramatic possession. The case you're referring to, I think, was a woman I call Maria. She didn't have a possession. She had what we call an oppression. In other words, she was being attacked by an evil spirit. That's what I eventually came to believe. She was being attacked by an evil spirit, but not possessed. So it was kind of a lesser attack. And what happened is, and this is not so unusual as I have come to realize over the years, she was being beaten up. And, she'd be lying on her bed and she would be looking in the view of onlookers as if she was getting pummeled, literally punched and pummeled by somebody. And she had bruises on her body, and these bruises would appear as if, and this was described by quite a few people, as if this was invisible bruises coming out of the blue. And by the time I saw her, she was brought to me by, one of the most famous exorcists in the United States, who is now deceased, guy who actually later became a good friend of mine. And he had come to my office and said, Dr. Gallager, I'd like you to, evaluate this woman. I said, well, Father, with all due respect, I'm a professor of psychiatry and, I'm a little skeptical of this stuff. And he said, well, that's the type of guy we want. We want somebody who's skeptical. So when the woman came to see me, she gave a story. She was actually a very good woman. This was not somebody who had been involved in evil or so, as quite frankly, a number of possessed people are. She was a lovely woman, very philanthropic. She happened to be very pro-life, and, she did a lot of charitable work. She was married, and she and her husband came, and they both tell me, look, we just can't explain what's going on. And they had showed me some medical tests, and I did some medical tests. Everything was negative. And, I said to her, well, what do you think is going on? And like a lot of people, it's not such a common belief in America, but becoming increasingly so. She thought that she had been cursed by a local brujo, which is sort of the Spanish word for like a wizard or a male witch. And I came to conclude after, talking to her quite a bit, that, she was right, that she seemed to be assaulted in this type of oppression by evil spirits. And, I've met people over the years who are beaten up by spirits, choked, scratched. This is what we call, unless the demon possesses them, this is what we call oppression. Oppression and possession are the two major forms, at least using the lingo that we use in Catholicism. They are the two major forms of what we call extraordinary attacks of demons. This was the real deal.
So let me, if you don't mind me asking you something, Doctor, as it happens, my father is also a psychiatrist, so I've kind of grown up around a fair amount of stuff and hearing some unusual stories. And right. I'm sure you're familiar with things like, psychosomatic illnesses and so forth, and multiple personality disorders. I'm curious about how do you evaluate something and say, you know what, I don't think this fits into a medical diagnosis of any sort. I think it's over here. How do you assess that?
First of all, it's a rigorous diagnosis. So you're not jumping to any conclusion.
Sure.
Now, I am a professor of psychiatry. I mean, trust me, I'm not tooting my own horn, but, you have to go through a lot to become a full professor, okay? I am incredibly experienced in psychiatry. I have probably evaluated during the course of my career at least 25,000 people. Now, this is in my normal professional work. Now, people sometimes ask me, well, of those 25,000 or so people, how many of those were possessed or oppressed? And especially fundamentalists are surprised when I say 0. Somebody has not just walked into my office that I was told to evaluate for psychiatric reason, and did I conclude that person was oppressed or possessed? The people, and I've seen quite a few cases, several hundred, they are sent to me with people already suspecting, well, we can't explain this. There may be something more to this. And then I have to make a tough decision. Now, I'm not saying that those people sent to me in this special way, because these are not patients of mine. So we're not talking about people that I'm evaluating in the normal course of my professional work. These are people that somebody, and quite possibly the individual themselves, obviously, have come to me specifically for an evaluation. And what I do is, since I'm a very experienced psychiatrist, but I've also seen, I'm convinced, more of these cases of possession and oppression than any other physician in the world. I'm convinced that I have. I've been doing this for, 2.5 decades at least. You can tell the difference, I can tell when somebody has a psychiatric problem like multiple personality or psychosomatic. I was trained in this stuff up to wazoo, including at, some fine institutions like my Yale Department of Psychiatry. On the other hand, if the person has a diabolic attack, again, you're not just diagnosing that willy-nilly or by exclusion. You expect certain things to be evident. You expect something in the history to suggest there might be a reason. You suspect that there's going to be something of a paranormal nature, or at least so different from a normal medical illness that an experienced physician and psychiatrist like myself is going to say, if they're honest, well, look, this doesn't fit a normal psychiatric condition. For instance, there is a medical disorder called psychogenic purpura. Now, what that means basically is bruising spontaneously because of psychological reason. But, you have a certain, usually psychiatric history behind that. The person is kind of very stressed, whatever. And you do lab tests and you get confirmation that there's something, off with some of their labs. This woman's labs were all normal. She was a very sane, healthy person. She might have been attacked for one of two reasons, either because she was cursed, because contrary to what people believe, that does occur. Although, again, you can't be superstitious about it. Number two, she might have been attacked precisely because she was such a good, holy person. The demonic world really dislikes those people too. So anybody who thinks, well, if you're holy, you're automatically protected from all demonic attacks is mistaken. People should read some of the lives of great holy figures in history. Great
Right.
saints, for instance, and these people are attacked. They're not possessed, but they're attacked. This was a woman in that category. I never really knew, of course, was it possible that she was cursed? Were they looking for a superstitious explanation? It's hard to pin those things down, but I knew she was attacked by evil spirits because I was looking at the totality of the case. This was not psychiatric. This was not a clotting disorder or something. And, after a while, when you see enough of these cases, and I've seen several hundreds, you become pretty confident that you can diagnose these people. And that's why I wrote the book. That's why I teach a course in this stuff.
Doctor, I want to ask you, you kind of mentioned some of this, but are there commonalities as if you're oppressed or possessed? Are there commonalities that lead to a person being possessed? Do they have to be a certain type of person besides, you mentioned being holy or having that commonality? Are there other things you
Well, there can be people who are holy. I'm not saying that most people are possessed are holy. Quite the contrary. These are people who have often turned to evil in a serious way in their life, or turned to something sort of occult, paranormal activity of their own. Curiosity killed the cat. Well, curiosity about occultism and serious practice of occultism can also lead to possession. What I'm saying, Todd, is that you're looking for a total picture that helps explain it. Normally, very holy people, by the way, are not possessed. That's rare to the point of almost non-existent. But the people who get attacked are like this other case that I referred to, which I can talk about for a minute if you're interested. It's a case called that I called Julia. Now, she was a practicing Satanist. She was attacked. She was possessed. And she had what even the two exorcists, one of whom was the guy who came to my office when I was, this was after my residency when I was at Cornell Medical College. And he introduced me to her. That's an interesting story in itself, because I was up in my bedroom with my wife, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, we had two cats that just went berserk. And they'd never done it before. They never did it afterwards. And, I looked at my wife like, what's going on? Did they have something bad to eat? Did they have catnip? Whatever. And, we just chalked it up, something weird. We had to separate the cats because they were clawing at each other like champion prize fighters. They were really trying to seriously hurt each other. So I hadn't met this woman who was described to me already as a high priestess in a satanic cult. Cults that I believe are rare. And the next morning I met her because this exorcist brought her to my house, which was not a very welcome thing for him to do. I got annoyed at him. I said to him later, I can't believe you brought this Satanist woman to my house. But they ring the doorbell. I trudge down the stairs, first thing out of this woman's mouth is, I'd never met her before. I heard about her, I never met her. She says to me, well, Dr. Gallager, how'd you like the cats last night?
Wow.
It's a true story. Those are the kind of stories I tell in my book, Demonic Foes, because, I have a lot of them. And if you get involved in these cases on a serious level, in whatever capacity, witnesses, assistants to holding people down in exorcisms, priests, a few of us doctors. I'm certainly not the only doctor who evaluates these people in the world. I know many, although a lot of them don't like to speak out that much. But there was just no way. This was a true Satanist who became possessed.
So, Doctor, let me ask two questions here, and this is probably born out of my own ignorance. Do you know, and you may not know the answer to this, do you know is there an official church position on this stuff? And second, is it something the Vatican tracks? Is there a database? I'm just curious about these things.
Well, first of all, I want to say right at the outset, I don't work for the church.
I understand.
I give a course at a seminary. But I don't speak for the church. The church actually doesn't speak for me. I am a member of the church, and I'm a practicing Catholic, so that's where I stand. But it's not as if, when I say I evaluate cases, an exorcist and other ministers too, Protestant ministers. I've had Jewish rabbis. I've had Muslim imams who want my opinion too. So I've talked to people from a lot of different faiths about this issue. So the Vatican has approved the organization that we talked about, this International Association of Exorcists, after many years, by the way, because the Vatican tends to be cautious about this stuff. There is no international database. Everything is organized through individual dioceses. The person who, in Catholicism, if you want an exorcism, you actually have to get permission. The case has to be presented. The case has to be evaluated thoroughly. You have to rule out psychiatric and medical problems. And, ultimately the bishop or his designee has to approve it. So it's a very rigorous process. And as I mentioned before, you have to look at the totality of a case. And you make a decision. And there is a famous manual which has been updated several times called the Roman Ritual, which is really a list of a lot of different types of prayers that the church uses, and it talks a little bit about criteria for exorcism, but it also then lists the exorcism prayers. And that again, that manual, which has existed since 1614, by the way, revised a number of times, that manual requires that the exorcist, who makes the ultimate decision, I mean, they usually listen to me, but it's the responsibility of a spiritual person, not a doctor. And that exorcist is supposed to have a moral certainty. So they too are supposed to look at the evidence, consult a doctor if needed, and that's how I get involved, and then make sure that they are certain you're dealing with a possession. And they are supposed to be, educated people, knowledgeable people, not prone to hysteria, mature, holy person. This is all spelled out in the official Catholic manual. So it's a rigorous process. The Vatican, as I said, doesn't keep a database. It's more like local dioceses, which are run by a bishop, which are ultimately, the local people in charge of this.
Doctor, let me ask you this. I grew up in the Catholic Church, familiar with many priests over the years. How many priests are trained as exorcists? Are there more than we would think, or is there one in every parish? Do they have to call them in from across the country? How does that work?
Well, it's been an evolving situation. When I first got involved, which wasn't that long ago, there were very few exorcists. For that reason, by the way, Todd, I saw so many cases because there were so few of them. So, for instance, there were 2 exorcists on the Julia, the Satanist case. Very dramatic exorcism. She levitated, spoke foreign languages, the whole 9 yards. Obviously, paranormal stuff. Now, at that time, there weren't that many. There were a handful.
Did you witness the levitations and all
that?
I
did not. No, I did not.
Okay.
I've been to probably about 200 or 250 exorcisms in my life. I've heard people speak foreign languages. I speak several myself. Even outside of the exorcisms, I've seen a lot of very paranormal stuff. I have spoken over the years, because remember, I go to this meeting and I talk to a lot of different people. Over the years, I've heard from about 35 people who have reported to me. And these are, salt of the earth people. They have no reason to lie, They swear to me that they, witnessed a levitation. I have not witnessed a levitation myself. It is, admittedly, even within the field of possession, it's very, very rare. But these are the kind of things that, in a way, you are looking for. Do they start speaking foreign languages without having studied them? Do they exhibit enormous strength? I evaluated a Lutheran woman once who was being given a sort of exorcism deliverance prayer. She was possessed by a somewhat naive Lutheran deacon. And, he thought he was going to solve the problem. When she went into the possessed state, which the exorcism sort of elicits, in other words, to get the demon to exhibit itself, she took the deacon and she threw him across the room.
Wow.
Across the church hall. That's the kind of supernormal strength. And they also possess, a lot of these possessed individuals, they will show evidence, either consciously or only in their trance when the demon manifests itself. They'll have all kinds of paranormal knowledge about things and about people that they have no way of knowing. Julia herself had that ability even outside of her trances. For instance, she told me how my mother died. She said, I know she died of ovarian cancer, which was true.
Right.
Now, she didn't look me up in the newspaper or something. There's no way she would have known that, because she also knew how about, 20 other people died as I talked to her. I spent a lot of time with this woman because if you think about it, guys, here is a member of a rare, because I regard it as rare, satanic cult. She was a devil worshiper. She agreed to talk to me openly, even though she felt threatened by the group, because now she wanted to get rid of the possession. And this possession, which again I describe in the book, this possession was, in the words of the 2 very experienced exorcists I mentioned, who were traveling all over the country, sometimes I traveled with them to see cases, they said it was the most flamboyant, dramatic possession they'd ever seen in their life. So this was the real deal. And she had a lot of paranormal powers, even outside of her trances, presumably because, she had followed Satan so closely. Let me give you an example. I was on the telephone line with the priest once, and I had already heard this demonic voice. Well, let me take a step back. So I'm driving in a car with the priest. He was kind of scouting out the territory for where he was going to conduct an exorcism. All of a sudden, this woman sitting in the back seat, whom I call Julia, starts going into a trance, and this malevolent voice comes out of her and says, I won't try to imitate it, but it was, gruffer. It's obviously using her vocal cords because they take over the body. They can't take over, the will, the soul, but they can take over the body. And this voice comes out of her and says, talking to the priest who was driving, says, listen, you effing priest, fill in the blanks. Listen, you effing priest, we told you to leave her alone. You'll be sorry. I mean, they're often kind of threatening and nasty. I also remember that at some point he called the priest a monkey priest. And I always say to people, that's how they think of us. They think of us as beasts. They think of us as stupid human creatures with a body. They think of us like as, not much higher than a monkey, because they are so smart and pure spirits. So they're extremely arrogant. Well, anyway, to get back to what I was saying, so I'm on the telephone line, probably a couple of weeks later with this priest, and we're talking about, whether I can go to the exorcism. And I didn't go to any of our exorcisms. I'm a pretty busy guy. And, and I would have had to travel a little bit. So in the middle of my conversation with this priest, who had been the one driving the car, that same voice came in over the telephone line, said more or less the same thing. Listen, you effer, we're warning you, you leave her alone. Obviously attempting to intimidate him. And I said to the priest, I said, did you just hear that? He goes, yeah, because this is a very dramatic case that happens. I'll give you one more power of hers, because I could talk about this all evening. So she always claimed to me, and I would meet with her privately. She wanted my help. I think she respected the opinion of a doctor, perhaps more than even the priest. She said, I can see people from a distance. And this is what parapsychologists call remote viewing. It's I'm sure that people have talked to Todd and Ike about the third eye and stuff like that. I mean, these people really are seeing something, although it's more a mental image, a very powerful mental image. I said, so Julia, what are you talking about? I don't really believe you. You've mentioned this before. She goes, well, I, for instance, I can see the chief exorcist at the moment. There was another guy. This guy was an ex-Marine, tough guy. And, he lived about 100 miles away from where we were. And I said, okay, I think I said, okay, Miss Smarty Pants. I said, you tell me what he's doing now and what he's wearing. She goes, well, he's walking along the beach near his house. He's saying his breviary, which are his prayers. And I said, what is he wearing? He said he has a blue windbreaker on and he has khakis. Again, he was ex-military. She had no way of knowing that. So I said, okay, I'm going to call him. So I called him. He had also become a friend of mine. And, I said, Father A, that was a kind of pseudonym he used actually in real life. It was kind of his nom de guerre, his war name, so to speak. And I said, so Father A, what are you doing? He said, who wants to know? I said, I want to know. So he said, well, I usually am in my residence, but today I decided I would, take a walk along the beach. I said, what are you doing? He's saying, I'm saying my official prayers. And I'm saying, what are you wearing? And he said, I think I know what's going on. You're talking to Julia, right? And I said, yes. He said, well, I'll tell you what I'm wearing. I have a windbreaker on. I said, what color? Blue. And, I have my khakis on. Now, she had seen it. And it's not like normally he would be walking along the beach and dressed in this way. He was a priest. A lot of times he'd be dressed in his priestly clerics. And, he would have normally said his prayers at his residence. She knew that.
So let me ask you this question. I know you said that you consider this to be a rare phenomenon. And
which one?
Just based on your impression, is this something, does it tend to go in waves? Are there periods of history where more of this is going on and less? Is there any kind of increase or decrease that you're aware of, or is it relatively?
I think I think this stuff has occurred rarely, but all throughout history.
Right.
And I think if you really know the historical literature, and I'm a great lover at history. I was a classics major at Princeton. I studied ancient history in a lot of depth. Even in the ancient world, let alone in other cultures, other societies, other religious environments, there have always been people who go into a trance and some kind of voice emerges out of them. I mean, that's universal. That is universal. There was a famous anthropologist who studied, 374 cultures, I think, and she found that in 3/4 of them, they had clear evidence of possession. Of course, the absence of evidence doesn't mean it didn't exist. It means she just couldn't find it. The most famous massive compendia of possessions throughout history was written by a German professor, an agnostic, of about 100 years ago. It was called Demoniacal Possessions, from the German, demoniacal possession in antiquity, the Middle Ages, and modern times. He gave thousands of cases throughout history, thousands. Now, a lot of times, if you know history, people ascribe it to different things.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you remember reading from your high school history maybe about the Oracle of Delphi?
Sure, yep.
So
I've actually been to Delphi. It's a fascinating place.
I've been there too. And the Oracle would go into a trance,
Yeah.
and she would reveal hidden knowledge in a different voice. And she wouldn't remember it. People would have to write down what she said. Now, people can say, well, she was a good guesser, or, one theory that is kind of discredited is, there were vapors and she was hallucinating, blah, blah, blah. No, there were people from all over the Mediterranean. Plutarch writes about it, the famous Roman historian. Very prominent people would come to get her advice. That's the exact same thing as Julia revealing hidden knowledge. Now, what did the Greeks think? The Greeks did believe, in fact, most cultures have believed in evil spirits. But the Greeks believed, especially because they thought this was kind of a benign thing, they believed it was Apollo. Why'd they believe it was Apollo? Because it said it was Apollo.
Right.
There was another famous shrine in Asia Minor called the Dona, where, Zeus was supposed to talk. I'm sure you've all heard of cases where people will say, well, yeah, this woman was possessed, or this man was possessed, and they said they were Hitler or Judas, or, some dead soul, or this was my grandfather who was, an occultist. What is the explanation? These people are all experiencing possession. The spirits are lying. They are pretending to be gods and goddesses. They are pretending to be dead souls. And in the Christian tradition, and this goes for Protestantism just as much as Catholicism, of course, what happens during the exorcism is they are forced, this becomes a big kind of question during the exorcism, they are forced to reveal their true identity, which is an evil spirit. And they don't want to do that because they want to lie, they want to confuse people. In a way, when the priest, which is a very common question or technique that they're using, they're trying to get the name of the demon. And the reason they do that, it's not idle curiosity, is because the demon doesn't want to reveal its name. And a large part of the point of the demon revealing their name is because then the exorcist knows that they have a little control over the case, that the demon is forced to reveal its name. It's, in a way, it's forced to submit. Now, I would say it's submitting to the church and to our Lord, and it's forced to do it, doesn't want to do it. So then it has to tell the truth. And what happens is, I remember a guy who came into my office once, and, paganism is kind of growing a little bit in this country. And, he had me speak. I don't normally like to speak to these spirits, but I was trying to evaluate this guy and get the whole story. He had me speak to a spirit that he felt was possessing him. That spirit said it was Zeus, because that spirit had convinced this guy that he was being possessed by Zeus.
Wow.
Which, of course, was BS.
Incredible. We've been talking with Dr. Richard Gallager. His book is called Demonic Foes: My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks in the Paranormal. Dr. Gallager, we appreciate you joining us on the show tonight. It's fascinating. Your book is available now. People can find it, I imagine, on Amazon. Where would you suggest they go?
Yeah, probably go to Amazon. You could also go to it's published by HarperCollins. You could go on the HarperCollins website, but most people are familiar with Amazon. You just click in Demonic Foes, and it's been out for, several months, since the fall. And, I was very pleased that HarperCollins let me write the book that I wanted to write. It's a pretty serious book. I mean, I'm giving you a lot of, sort of sensational sounding anecdotes from the book, but it's a serious treatment of this subject.
Dr. Gallager, thank you for being here tonight on the show. We appreciate you joining us.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for an interesting discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right, Ike, it's time to move on to our news of the night. Some of the stories you may have not seen all over the place, but we posted a few of them on our social media, but we've gotten these from the Full Spectrum Project. And our first story, Ike, comes to us from interestingengineering.com. Ike, it seems like we're up in sightings of UFOs here in the States. That may come as no surprise, considering most of us were in lockdown over the last year, working from home, or in many cases not working. And I'm wondering how this coincides with the rise in alcohol sales over the lockdown. Think about it.
That actually is interesting. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen this across the board, but I think I was just reading an article about San Francisco that was saying something to the effect of the number of opioid and drug overdose deaths were something like 500% larger than any COVID deaths. So it wouldn't surprise me if these things are connected.
Hey, alcohol sales have been going through the roof. They're up hundreds of %. But the article here is stating, it cites a report in the New York Times that says there's been a surge in UFO sightings across the country. In New York alone, there were more than 300 reports. The National Reporting Center, the National UFO Reporting Center, said in 2020, there were more than 7,200 filed sightings across America. That number was nearly 1,000 sightings higher than 2019. So what's going on here, Ike? There's a couple of theories. Are UFOs flying closer to Earth? Are we getting more visits? Or night skies clearer because of the nationwide lockdown? Or I'm just going to go with my theory that alcohol sales are up.
Well, it is interesting. It will be interesting to look back on this period 10 or 20 years from now, because I think, sort of regardless of what you think of the virus and the reaction to it, clearly the population is under some serious stress. I'm sure that plays into it. It'll be interesting to sort this out later.
It will. Okay, next quick story. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Are you familiar with the black shuck?
Yeah, I think that's one of those meals that you're not supposed to eat unless it's cooked well or something. Well,
you spend a lot of time in the UK. These entities are well known apparently in the UK. Next time you're over there, ask somebody about it. They're seen as demonic black dogs, which were found in folklore and mythology. The story comes to us from atlasobscura.com. As legend has it, on August 4th, 1577, the whole town of Bleiburg was gathered for Sunday services in the Bleiburg Holy Trinity Church when a storm gathered very quickly, struck the town, pounding the church with wind and rain, okay? During this storm, lightning struck the church's spire. The spire comes crashing down into the congregation. Here's when things got really strange. Well, apparently there's a lot of smoke, lightning as well. When the smoke and dust cleared, a large black shaggy dog stood before the congregation and quickly ran out the church, pouncing on the large wooden doors. Well, apparently this dog left claw marks that were burned forever into the door, and it's known to the locals as the devil's fingerprints. Well, scientists have studied these so-called claw marks and determined they're more than likely created with a candle, maybe not in 1577, but later after. These burn marks were placed on churches, rather, more than likely to keep the demon and curses out of the church, as opposed to the process of letting them escape. However, to this day, Ike, the legend of the black shuck or the dog is found in nearby towns' coats of arms and the town's weather vane, which to this day continues to be struck by lightning. So there you go.
Yeah, I've got to say there's a sort of range of things that we talk about here. And, you know, in terms of credibility, I've got, UFOs, right. Big feet, Loch Ness things. I've got to say black devil lightning dogs. It's not high on my list.
I'll tell you some of the things in my list, though. What we were talking with Dr. Gallager about just a few minutes ago, that's fascinating, but, you know, it's terrifying as hell.
No, it is. And that's actually something I wish we'd spoken to him about. I would imagine just being involved in that, it seems like that'd be very unsettling, regardless of what's going on.
I didn't know there was demonic possession and oppression. Oppression is when the demon abuses you physically in many cases. In possession, of course, I guess, I didn't get to hear the end of the Julia story, but I imagine if you pick up the book, you'll see how it ends. You wonder if some relief can be brought to these people. But I've always heard if you go looking for demons, you're going to find them.
Yeah, I wish we had gotten, maybe we can talk to him again at some point. I'd be curious to hear how these things resolve.
Yeah, and if he's able to offer any relief to these patients that he does evaluate. I mean, incredible stories, folks. And it was great to have Dr. Gallager on the show. Hey, we're going to wrap up the show for this week. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel called The Road Beyond Podcast. Ike uploads all the videos. This one will be uploaded on there later. But you're going on vacation next week, right?
Yes, I'm going on a fishing trip with a demonic black dog.
There you go. So Ike will be hanging out with black dogs, not the Led Zeppelin song, a real black dog, because he does have one. He'll be out next week. Next week, we're going to have a special guest on here filling in for Ike. We've got Daryl Sims, the alien hunter. We're going to bring him on the show and we'll be interviewing a few guests. So make sure you tune in next week. Ike, enjoy your vacation.
Thank you. And if I catch anything interesting like a Loch Ness monster, I will take photos, certainly blurry ones. You'll enjoy it.
Oh, good. Well, good to see that. Folks, thanks for being here on the show. Make sure you check out all of our episodes on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We're all over the place. Thanks for being here. We'll see you again on The Road Beyond.